Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg, and our guest today is Dr. Lyndsey Hookway, who I adore because that rhymed. Who is Dr. Lyndsey Hookway? She is a person with a PhD in public health. She has a background in pediatric nursing. She's worked with infants, children, and families for almost 20 years. She's an internationally board certified lactation consultant. She's an international speaker. She has also published several scientific publications and done research into various areas. She's the co-founder and clinical director of the Holistic Sleep Coaching Program. She's the author of Let's Talk About Your New Family's Sleep. She's the author of Still Awake. She's the author of Holistic Sleep Coaching. And she co-authored the writing book with Amy Brown. And she also wrote the book Breastfeeding the Brave. So she knows her shit. And in this conversation, we dive into everything related to holistic sleep. And in particular, we talk about certain myths of child sleep. We talk about how your family's sleep will change. I have a few friends that have told me, hey man, when your baby arrives, you are going to get destroyed. And I didn't love that. Didn't love that. So I was curious and I had a lot of questions for Lyndsey. We talk about the art and science of holistic sleep. Is sleeping an art? Is sleeping a science? Is it por qué no las dos? Is it both? We talk about the impact of stress on sleep, why you should never leave a child to cry it out. And then we dork out and dive into epigenetics and the nervous system. So this is a really hearty conversation around sleep in general and about small children's sleep in particular. But it's also more than that. It's a holistic approach to health, and it takes a look at the social and cultural factors that influence the decisions that we make to raise humans and to be humans. And so I found it super informative. I found it very helpful, and I'm certain that you will too. As usual, I've included links in the show notes to everything related to the guest. So if you want to learn more about Dr. Lyndsey Hookway, if you want to check out her Instagram page or her books, etc., links in the show notes. Click those, get involved. And without further ado, please do enjoy this conversation with Dr. Lyndsey Hookway. All right, Dr. Lyndsey Hookway, welcome to the podcast. And my first question, I guess, is who are you? Like, what's your deal? I did some research on you, and you are very accomplished, very experienced. You seem to have done many things, but how do you describe yourself?
Yeah, that's actually a nightmare question. When people ask me that question, I'm like, I don't know really. I'm some rando from the UK. I started out as a children's nurse, a pediatric nurse, and then I kind of segued into children's public health nursing, so caring for families with children under 5. Then I passed my IBCLC lactation consultant exam. And through all of that, I was supporting families with sleep, because sleep is just, oh my gosh, it's just a thing that comes up for everybody, particularly when you're caring for very young families. I do have 2 kids of my own. They slept, as I'll probably get to, like babies. Actually, looking back, I don't think they slept that unusually. But at the time, I thought I was going to die from lack of sleep. So yeah, I mean, currently right now, I spend most of my time teaching people to be sleep consultants and coaches who respond to families in a responsive, evidence-based, compassionate way. And I'm also a researcher, so I kind of indulge my love of all things nerdy with my other hat on, but that's kind of nothing related to sleep, actually. So we'll leave that aside for now.
Okay. I'm a science dork as well, so the science dork in me acknowledges and honors yours. But that was actually one of the reasons I was intrigued to talk to you is because you seem to, at first glance, have a strong research foundation, evidence-based approach to all of this stuff. And as we were saying before we started recording, it strikes me that as a new parent to be who's getting into the space of the parenting literature and the sleep literature and the breastfeeding, etc., you described it as still the Wild West and lots of very strong opinions out there. And so I'm hoping over the next 45 minutes or so we can navigate some of that selfishly to help me prepare for my life-changing ordeal. And if it benefits others, I think it must if it benefits me. So I know that you have a book called Holistic Sleep Coaching, and I know you have a book called Let's Talk About Your Family's New Sleep. And I'm curious because when I read that, you described the art and the science of holistic sleep. And I'm curious, aside from that word sleep, maybe we can unpack what it means to say the art and science of holistic sleep. Is that a decent softball question to jump off on?
uh, yeah, absolutely. We could talk about that all day, couldn't we? You know, why is it an art? Why is sleep an art? You might ask, and I think it is because um, it's very interconnected. So that the science is pretty simple to explain in lots of ways. There's lots of scientific aspects of sleep. Um, these are, I mean, they're not easy papers to read, but you can find out lots of information about how sleep works, you know, how sleep is influenced. But I think what makes it an art is thinking about families, thinking about how relationships affect our well-being, thinking about how our stress and our regulation affects well-being and therefore sleep indirectly, and then all of the other things that impact sleep, social interaction, stress, how we respond to other people. So thinking about things like play, development, nutrition, health, sensory needs. There's so many things that interact with sleep in different ways for different people. And that's what makes sleep really interesting because it's never going to be the same for any two people on the planet. And that's why you can have child number one who doesn't sleep like ever. And then you can have child number two who, you know, attempts to show the eldest up, which is what happened to me actually. And they're both normal. They're both within the parameters of what we would describe as normal when you look at the science of sleep. And yet it becomes this really complicated beast because you're also having to navigate lots of other people's opinions and trying to navigate that with grace and compassion and kindness, and empathy for the different journeys that people are on with their sleep and their parenting and becoming new parents. Whew, that's for me, that's what makes it really challenging because you can make a real mess of that. I think you can make people feel terrible, you can make people feel guilty, you can make people feel under pressure, inadequate, you can make them feel like they or their baby are broken. There's such
Hmm.
beauty in it when you handle it softly and gently and with nuance. So yeah, I hope that vaguely answers why it's an art and a science.
Yeah, and so I'm hearing, and based on some research I did on you, that it's not just about falling asleep as much as it is about a whole suite of confounding factors. I wrote down nervous system and epigenetics and stress and relationships all affect the dynamic between the parents and the baby. And then the baby has its own biological thing going on. And so there's this like, is it a puzzle to figure out? Or are you just trying stuff and seeing what works? Or are you leaning on best practices? Like what advice do you have for a guy like myself that in about, a week or two is not going to be sleeping 8 hours a night probably for a minute?
Yeah, what advice? Well, I think You can try and puzzle it out. You could. There are so many things that you could try to understand.
Mm,
But honestly, the biggest piece of advice that I would give any new parent or soon to be new parent is to not quite expect the unexpected, but just accept that it's going to be a little messy for a while. It's going to be a journey of figuring out who your new little person that you've just made is, what makes them tick, how your relationship dynamic with your partner is changing, kind of how you navigate parenting together, your the influences that you have that you bring to parenting. So how you were parented, how you've seen friends and peers parenting, all of that stuff kind of gets chucked in this big melting pot when you bring that new little bundle home. And then you also have to add into that the feeding and getting to grips with just infant care in general. So actually, I think in a way it's a lot to ask of a new parent to try and like cerebrally understand sleep in a
mm,
really meaningful way. I think there is actually an argument for just going, it's just, it might be a bit of a shit show for a while, and that's okay. And we might not know what we're doing. We might not have a clue what's going on, but that's also okay. And I say that as a nerd who spends a lot of time, explaining to people how sleep works. But I think
mm,
sometimes we can almost overthink this stuff. Like, it's a little human. They're going to come with their own bundle of genetics. They're going to be influenced by you and your partner. And I think one of the best things you can do is lean on each other, support each other, try to stay calm, because babies are these like emotional like satellites. They kind of are affected by our moods and our emotions and our stress states. It's almost like they're on the lookout, like, are mum and dad cool? Are they okay? Or is there something that I need to be kind of on high alert about? And if they sense that you're freaking out about something, the chances are they're going to go, oh, I better not relax too much, because it seems like something's going down. So I might need to react at any minute. And so they don't shift into that relaxed state that we want them to be in. So actually,
mm.
learning how to be calm, and being there for each other as you figure it out together is probably one of the most helpful things you can do in the first couple of weeks, for sure.
That's helpful. And I noted that you have a keynote talk that you do about the myths of child sleep. And as I read that title, I just sort of pondered for a moment of like, what do I believe as a consequence of society or culture or movies? And it's like, oh, you need to have a strict schedule or else the kid's going to be all messed up, and you have to have bath time, and then you read the book time, and you let them cry for 4 minutes, and then you pause, and then you let them cry for 3 minutes, and there's all these like regimented protocols out there that you're shaking your head at even as I say them. And so I love the idea of accepting that it's going to be a shit show, which I find to be both reassuring and terrifying in some
Yeah.
regard, coming from an expert. I'm like, no, no, Lyndsey, just tell me the four things I need to know. And it's like, it's not that easy. But when we talk about holistic sleeping and the parent child dynamic and sleep training, I know that you must have opinions about best practices, I'm
Mm,
guessing. And I'd
plenty of those. Yeah.
be curious of what those opinions are.
Okay. This could be a long conversation, but I've
Okay.
got to preface it by saying, first of all, I believe fundamentally in a parent's right to choose. So all of us have the right to choose how we parent our kids, and it's absolutely none of my business how anybody chooses to handle sleep, whether they actively manage it, whether they choose something that I wouldn't choose, even if they choose something that I wouldn't teach other people to go out and provide for families. So that's none of my business. Um, but I think it's true that in our society we've we've kind of drifted over the last couple of 100 years into this way of thinking that we have to actively manage sleep or it's going to be an absolute disaster. The children aren't going to develop properly. They're going to be sleep deprived. Our marriages are going to be ruined. We're never going to sleep ever again. All manner of evil will happen if we don't actively sleep train our children. And that's where I have a number of issues. The first one is that you can't actually teach anybody to fall asleep because it is just a homeostatic bodily function. Everybody falls asleep when they have enough sleep pressure to do so. And that's the science of that is really cool. But we can come back to that or not. So that's the first thing. You can't actually teach somebody to fall asleep. You can provide conditions that are optimal for them to fall asleep, for sure. And you can manage yourself so that you're calm and so your little one can pick up on those signals that it's safe, it's a safe place, it's a safe time, it's a safe location to fall asleep. And then I think one of the biggest issues I have around this sort of the cultural trend of actively managing sleep, primarily with non-responsive approaches, is that it's just not how we've parented for thousands of years. And the issue I have with that is when people who are proponents of non-responsive sleep training start talking about how this is the optimal way to do it, this is where they and I fall out, because I fail to see how the way we've been parenting for thousands of years can possibly not be in the best interests of our species, because we've done all right, really. As a species, we've spectacularly managed to swarm the earth and be incredibly successful. And so it doesn't make sense that for thousands of years we have evolved and we have developed and we have done incredible things, all without, for thousands of those years, without clocks, without books recommending strict routines, without weird and wonderful products, without white noise machines, without magic swaddle sacks, without special cribs. We've just given birth to our babies, kept them close, kept them safe, fed them when they needed to be fed. And that was not every 3 hours or every 4 hours. It was just when nothing else worked. And somehow that's kept everybody going for thousands of years. And so it seems far-fetched to me to suggest that sleep training, by ignoring children or by putting them on a strict routine or by overriding their natural biological signals, by ignoring their behavioral cues, that doesn't make any sense to me, that would be a better way of doing it. And so I spend quite a lot of my time reassuring people that if they just want to learn how to read their little one's cues, if they just want to go with the flow, if they don't want to buy a crib or a cot, if they don't want to ever read a book about the optimal feeding schedule for their baby, that's okay. They could do that. And I'm not really here to argue with people about whether sleep training or other approaches are better or different. I'm just here to provide an alternative narrative for people who aren't into that kind of more, that kind of non-responsive approach. So the kind of strict schedules, some of those myths that you were talking about, that naps have to be a certain length, they have to be in a certain location, that bedtime has to be at a certain time or it's all going to go to shit, that you can't hold your baby to sleep, you can't feed your baby to sleep. All of that stuff often just adds stress for parents, because they're thinking, oh my gosh, this is really lovely, I really love holding my child while they fall asleep, there's nothing lovelier, but it's wrong, I'm doing something that's a little bit deviant, I'm going to be paying for this months down the line. That stuff just adds anxiety and robs you of the joy of being a new parent in those early days and weeks, for a lot
Yeah.
of people anyway.
I'm curious if you could distinguish or detail a bit more the difference between non-responsive and responsive sleep, or is it an intervention or?
Yeah, I mean, the it's not that I'm advocating doing nothing about sleep. So there are plenty of things that you can do to optimize and support sleep. What I don't ever teach or recommend is a non-responsive strategy. So within that kind of umbrella term, I would put things like controlled crying, often known as Ferberizing, so the Ferber method. Um, Sometimes it's known as spaced soothing, rapid return, gentle sleep training. There's all sorts of words. Basically, putting your child in their crib or cot and leaving the room and not coming back to them, irrespective of whether they're showing signs of distress or not. The more extreme version of that is extinction. So cry it out, or yeah, you shut the door and you do not return to their crib or cot until the morning. So that's often seen as the most extreme form of sleep training. I would say more people probably gravitate towards the modified form of extinction, which is controlled crying, with all those other synonyms that I just
Hmm.
suggested. So I'm not into any of that. I one of the main reasons I'm not into it is because crying is essentially communication, and while I absolutely understand that sometimes little ones crying, it doesn't necessarily always mean distress. It doesn't always mean the same thing. It can mean lots of different things, right? But it is communication. They are telling us something, and communication fundamentally needs to be heard. It needs to be listened to. It needs to be respected. And so ignoring that communication is what I'm not about. So I don't believe in leaving littles in their own distress without any parental support, and partly because they just don't have the emotional and psychological maturity and self-regulatory ability to be able to get themselves calm like we can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about the long-term sort of evolutionary perspective because I remember reading about sleep years ago, and you have the sort of hustle and grind culture of people saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead and I only need 4 hours of sleep a night and I'm good and it doesn't affect me at all. And then I kind of zoom out and it's like, we've been evolving for a very long time, millions of years, right? As a species, as a existence. And like it seems pretty efficient that we would optimize our time and our energy. And like if evolution hasn't done away with 8 hours of sleep or so, it seems like it's there for some deeper purpose that we don't quite understand. And keeping with that evolutionary context, it's like back in the day, I picture, us hunter gatherers living out in nature. And if you have a little newborn, the equivalent would be to like walk down the path, put the baby under a tree, and then come back at sunrise, right? Like let them
Yeah,
cry it out, so to speak.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, and that just seems like an odd thing to do back then, right?
yeah. Well, they'd
So
be gone, wouldn't they? They'd be
it'd be
somebody's
taking,
dinner.
yeah. And I
Yeah,
guess is that what's happening in the baby's mind? Is it thinking like I've been abandoned, my life is in danger, this is bad? I mean, I guess we can't know,
yeah.
but like,
We don't know. We don't know, and I do. We don't have a lot of research on this. We've got some research that's explored children who've been like, literally abandoned in orphanages, but I don't think it's fair to draw that comparison with children who are within the context of an otherwise responsive, loving home, and
hmm,
have just been left in their crib for 5 minutes. I'm not in any way equating that to being permanently abandoned, and equating the level of impact on brain development or emotional development or attachment. Not at
hmm,
all. So, but it's annoying in a way that that's the only kind of research that we do have. We do have some research that looks at the long term impacts of sleep training. Um, And so far, it hasn't conclusively shown any evidence of harm, but it doesn't really provide good enough evidence of safety either, because of the way that the research has been conducted. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but you're right. From an evolutionary point of view, has a baby moved on from the cave baby who's plonked under a tree while their parents go and fix dinner and forage some berries or nuts or whatever? I don't know.
Mm.
Lots of other human reflexes and functions and behavior patterns haven't moved on. Uh, so in lots of ways, I find it difficult to imagine that a baby has moved on in terms of that primal response and that need to be held, kept safe, kept close, and all the rest of it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm just trying to put myself in a thought experiment as like a newborn child. And I picture like I'm in this alternate reality, dark womb, warm, everything's cool. Like I don't even have to eat. I just get pumped nutrients in. I'm growing. Everything's fine. And then whoosh, I'm in the terror dome, like welcome to the ride, lights, sound, sights,
Yeah.
smells, all kinds of stuff's happening. And
Uh-huh.
then that seems quite disruptive. And then on top of that, to be placed alone in a dark place where your cries are unanswered and you don't have the brains to necessarily figure out any of it, uh,
Yeah.
that feels hard, I
Yeah.
guess, for lack of a better term. And I guess one of my questions at the beginning, you mentioned being compassionate and understanding, and I know a lot of parents or mothers or fathers or whatever have done this, like have done the sleep training path, and they might be feeling guilt or shame and that they're doing it wrong, that they've screwed up their child. It sounds like there's no evidence of that. We don't really know what's best. Like, what do you
Yeah.
say to people when they come and chat with you?
Yeah. It's so a few years ago, I developed a little bit of I wouldn't even call it a hypothesis, but a way of understanding different infant responses to non-responsive sleep training. This is not evidence-based. This is just based on my observation of,
It's
what
like,
people have told me about how their little ones have responded, right? And babies seem to fall into three categories. They either fall into the category that I call the rapid responders. So kids who perhaps they have an easy temperament, perhaps they were fairly malleable in terms of their sleep or their feeding or their routine or whatever, but they seem to get the idea really quickly. So they might cry a little bit for 3 or 4 days, but that's about it. And they don't cry long and loud. Um, and that seems to be it. They're done and they're sleeping really well. And I call those kids the rapid responders. Then there's another group of children who I call the slow responders. And these are the kids who cry much longer and louder. It seems to be that they wake more frequently, and when they wake, they cry for a fairly long period of time. They're harder to console, and the whole process goes on a little bit longer. So maybe more like 2-3 weeks. And then we have another group of children that I call the non-responders. And these are the ones that just cry and cry and cry and cry, and they don't really stop crying. And even when parents are persistent and consistent with the sleep training and they do whatever the sleep trainer or the pediatrician has told them, their little one just does not seem to get the memo at all. They just keep on crying. And I call those ones the non-responders. The issue I have is that you don't know ahead of time which camp your kid's going to be in. Um, and some
mm,
people might say, well, you could just try it then for 2 or 3 days and see how it goes. And that's where it comes back to my point that I started with, which is this is about parental choice. If you want to do that, there's lots of information out there about sleep training. I'm not here to tell you that you're doing the wrong thing or that you're going to screw up your child, because there isn't really strong evidence at the moment of that. You were asking about whether there's evidence about do they feel distressed when they're abandoned. The only thing that we have that's close to that is we do have some studies that prove that when children are held in skin-to-skin contact, their physiological stress response calms down. So we know that they find it soothing to be with a parent. We know that skin-to-skin, for example, helps with the pain response. It helps regulate breathing and heart rate and whatever. But we don't really have conclusive evidence that leaving your child to cry is definitely going to cause long-term harm, or it's going to screw up attachment or whatever. So if somebody comes to me and feels guilt or shame about having sleep trained, honestly, I think guilt and shame are pretty toxic, unhelpful emotions to carry. I think the best thing that anybody can ever do, if they've had a U-turn in the way that they think about this now, the best thing to do is actually just to think about what you're doing right now and focus on the relationship you have with your child now and in the future, rather than kind of navel gaze about what you did a few years ago. But if somebody's on the fence and they haven't committed to sleep training yet, my advice, I suppose, would just be just do some more reading about it. Ask a few people. Look at the opposing options. And I think the other thing that I would add to that is that I've talked about the kind of rapid responders, slow responders, and non-responders. This was actually something I talked about years ago, but there was a very recent study that came out by some researchers who were looking at kind of the real world experience of people using sleep training in the home. And what they found was that people who used cry it out, so the most hardcore form of non-responsive sleep training, it didn't take 3 to 5 days. On average, it took 25 days actually. So 25 days of consistently doing that form of sleep training before they actually saw demonstrable improvement in their child's sleep, which kind of fits, if that was the mean across hundreds of children, that fits with my observation that children do seem to fall into these three camps. I'm sure there are children who respond really quickly. Do I think that the children who respond after 2 or 3 days are damaged for life? No, I think that as a species, we're much more robust than that. I think little ones are resilient, and I that doesn't make sense to me that you could undo weeks, months, years of attachment with 2 or 3 nights of being less or not very responsive. That seems ridiculous to me. But it doesn't seem completely ridiculous that in a child with inherent vulnerabilities or risk factors, or with a frayed emotional attachment in the first place, who perhaps is more sensitive, who has other unmet needs, it doesn't seem far-fetched to me that those children who fall into the non-responder category might have more experience of distress and dysregulation. Does that make sense?
It does,
So
yeah. And
I don't think there's a black and white, are they going to be okay? I don't think there's a straight answer for that, which I know is frustrating.
no, I think you've done an eloquent, you've responded eloquently to that. And I'm thinking, as a science dork, like that's a really tricky nut to crack in terms of developing an experiment to test all of that when you have
Yeah,
newborn children who might just be drastically different from one another through their genetics, through their upbringing, through their temperament, etc. It's
yeah.
like, and
It's the
getting
night.
people to sign off on it. Like, we'd like to experiment on your child and deny
Yeah,
them sleep or deny them touch. And it's like,
yeah.
well, that's a tough one.
Good luck getting ethics for that. Yeah. Uh, I
I,
mean, it's the nightmare study, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
if you want to prove which blood pressure pill works better, you can get a lovely matched sample. You can randomize your sample to the blue pill or the red pill.
Mm,
You can control all the variables, and then you can measure their blood pressure before, during, after, and bam, you can get a really good idea about whether the blue pill or the red pill is going to fix your blood pressure. The trouble with sleep training and sleep in general is for a start, you're never going to be able to get a general random sample of the population, because you're going to have to exclude the kids who are premature, the children who are ill, parents with, major and enduring mental health problems. You're not going to be able to account for the children who will later go on to be diagnosed with a disability or a neurodevelopmental difference or sensory differences. You're not going to be able to control for any of that. And so you're going to end up recruiting for a study that at best is going to be a sort of an opt-in study where they're told from the get-go, right, now you might be allocated to the cried out group, or you might be allocated to the sit by their cot and pat them on the head group. So for a start, you're going to exclude all of the parents who are opposite ends of the spectrum. You're going to exclude the people who are like, hell no, I'm not going to leave my child to cry. And you're also going to exclude the people who are, hell no, I definitely want to be in the cried out group. I'm not messing around patting their head for like 5 years until they fall asleep. And so it's never going to be the sample that you want. And you end up with these really homogenous, usually white, usually in a very, very non-diverse sample. They're usually higher educated, married parents who are clearly not opposed to sleep training in the first place. So you've already got people who are kind of like, this is going to work. That they're going, you're going to have all of those biases inherent because of the design of the study. And this is where I have a problem with people who say, it's safe. I agree there's no evidence of harm, but I don't agree that there is conclusive proof of safety either, because of the way the studies have been conducted.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like the short answer in terms of how best to navigate sleep with a new one is it depends, right?
Yeah.
Because part of me hears you say, oh, for a certain chunk of newborn babies, the quick learners or whatever you said, the fast responders, 3 to 4 nights and they cry a little bit, but then they get it and everything's fine and there's no data to suggest that that's a bad thing. Selfishly, I'm like, well, that sounds like a pretty good trade. Like, that sounds pretty good, right? And
Yeah.
I've heard from many friends and resources that, oh, my child is such a good sleeper, right? And there's this sort of uh, generic approach whereby some kids just like get it and off and running, um, which doesn't necessarily make it easier per se, I think, to make decisions about how best to navigate these choices because it depends and we don't know. Is that a
Yeah.
fair summary?
Yeah, it's very fair. I mean, there was a study that came out just earlier this year that looked at the genetics of sleep, and basically what they did was they followed children up from 1 through to adolescence, and they looked at kind of parental report of sleep, but they also kind of looked at objective measures of sleep as well. So they attached about 1,000 children to actigraphs as well in their adolescent years to kind of give an objective picture of how these kids were sleeping. And they found that actually the children who exhibited traits of insomnia had done so since infancy, and they were the children who had genetic markers. So the researchers took some cord blood, or they did a blood test at age 6, and looked for these specific genetic markers of insomnia, frequent night waking. And lo and behold, the kids who had these genetic markers did exhibit these behaviors. And they started really early. It's not like you suddenly become a bad sleeper when you're an adult. Like, often the traits are there early on. I can certainly relate with my eldest child. Really didn't need a lot of sleep. Spectacularly little sleep. She was fine. She was really happy, and she was, delightful to be around. But of course, as a new parent, I was like, she's not getting enough sleep. She doesn't sleep anywhere near as much as anybody else I know. I've never met a baby like her, and that was as a pediatric nurse and public health nurse who'd met thousands of babies, I hadn't met a single baby like her. She really didn't sleep, but she was happy. And instead of looking at how happy she was, I obsessed over how little sleep she was getting. But you know what? She's now nearly 15 and she still doesn't get a lot of sleep, and she doesn't need a lot of sleep. And she's not the teenager who sleeps until midday. She genuinely wakes up pretty early and she's just good to go.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes with the best will in the world, you're going to get the child that your genes have made. And guess what? I don't need a lot of sleep either, and nor does
Right.
her dad. So like we were screwed from the start. I don't know how we managed to have one child who does at least sleep soundly. She doesn't need a lot of sleep, the other one, but she does. She's been an easier sleeper on the whole.
Yeah, that's interesting that there is just this random genetic component that determines how much sleep you as a person require. And I was
Or
reading
may
one of
do.
these, what's that?
Yeah. Or
As a
may
babe.
do. I mean, I'm not
Oh,
suggesting that if you're a crap sleeper, it's because
your
it's your
genes.
genes. Like then
Right.
there are other modifiable things that, might influence it as well.
That's fair. So it's not instigating hopelessness or helplessness.
No.
It's like you can control some aspects of
Yeah,
this, right? But there's
absolutely. Yeah.
contributing factors. One of the
Yeah.
books I was reading, it talked about the average amount a newborn needs is like, I don't even remember, 12 hours or whatever. But it said the range was something from like 8 to 18 hours. And I was
Yeah.
like, wait,
Yeah.
some kids only sleep 8 hours a day and some sleep 18? That is tremendously varied.
Nuts.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah,
wild.
so I mean, if you imagine that you are, I don't know, like you're a new dad, you've taken your new little one for a coffee, like you're going to go and meet some friends in a coffee shop to give your partner a break or whatever. Let's say you're sitting next to the parent whose baby sleeps 18 hours in 24, and you're sat there with a baby. I'm not wishing this on you, by the way, but
Thank you.
let's
Please,
let's distance this from you. Let's say that
can I be the 18-hour
your
one?
friend next to you has the 8-hour baby,
Yeah, that's
right?
good. Yeah.
And you're sitting there with your average baby who sleeps, let's say 13, 14 hours. Let me just wish that on you instead. But you've got these friends either side and they're comparing, like, oh, wow, my kid sleeps 2 hours at a time for every nap. They nap like 3 times a day. And then they sleep a solid 12 hours all night. They wake a couple of times for a feed. Like, yeah, it's amazing. We're getting loads of sleep. Versus the hapless friend who's healthy, normal, well-developing, thriving baby is getting 8 hours. But imagine how different their day looks. Imagine how much more rocking, entertaining, playing with, interacting with, feeding, all the things is happening if your baby is only asleep for 8 hours in 24. That's an awful lot of parenting compared with the parent whose baby is only awake for 6 hours in 24. Like, that's barely enough time to have a bath, have a few feeds, and, coo a little bit.
Mm.
That's a very different
Right.
parenting experience. But of course, if you're comparing that, if you're the 8-hour parent, you might then feel like you're obviously screwing it up. Your baby is obviously some kind of weird deviant, or worse, they are going to not develop properly because they're not getting enough sleep. And so you then go home, you're stressed and you're anxious, and you try to get your baby to go to sleep. And this is what I see all the time. People trying so hard to get somebody who's not tired to go to sleep. And so what I end up hearing is, it takes me like an hour to get my baby to go to sleep, and I have to do all the things. I have to bounce, and I have to pat, and I have to shush, and we have to have this special lovey, and the white noise machine is on, and it has to be a full moon and the wind blowing from a northeasterly direction, and it has to be pitch black. And I do all of this for an hour, and they sleep for 15 minutes. And that's what I hear over and over again. And the reason that was all such a pain in the ass was because they weren't tired in the first place. So you needed to put a huge amount of effort into calming down a child who was trying loudly, probably, to tell you, Dad, Mum, I'm not tired. Like, just let me hang out. Let me talk to you. Let me go watch the birds. Let me, kick my legs on the playmat. Let me do anything. But I don't want to be in a dark room. So of course I'm going to yell and fight sleep because I'm not tired. But it then derails your parenting confidence because you were maybe watching an app, or you'd read about dreaded wake windows. Like, I hate wake windows. I'm kind of infamous for it. You'd read about a sleep schedule, or you'd read some stuff, and what a lot of people then tend to do is they kind of put on this sleep filter, the tired filter, and they interpret their infant's behavior through this lens of thinking they know what their child wants, rather than adopting a curious approach like, oh, you're fussing on your playmat. What could that be? Are you bored? Do you need to be picked up? Do you need a nappy change? Do you need a feed? Have you had enough of the air freshener that's in the room? Like, it could be a billion things, but if you're wearing the tired filter, any fussing behavior is going to be interpreted as fatigue. And then you're going to go ahead and put all of that effort into trying to get them to go to sleep. And if all the while they were just trying to tell you they were bored, it's not going to work. If they're not tired, sleep won't fix it.
I'm curious too, how much of it might be projection from the parents being exhausted and wanting to sleep, and like just wanting their child to fall asleep. That must play
Yeah.
into that as well.
Oh,
I'm curious,
100%.
Lyndsey, what are wake windows and why do you hate them? Why are you infamous for hating them? Like, I don't know that term.
So you'll definitely hear somebody at some point talking about these. These are non-evidence-based charts normally that give an idea of how many hours a child can be awake for at different ages before you need to try and put them down for a nap, which is a phrase that makes me laugh because most of the time when you put a child down anywhere, they just cry. but anyway, let's say try and facilitate a nap instead, because that's more accurate. So you might look at your wake window chart for your 8-week-old, and the wake window chart might say that, after an hour and a half or an hour and 3/4, you need to try and facilitate the next nap. And the wake windows will vary according to the age of your child, and frankly, according to whichever wake window chart you're reading. And these charts are developed by often sleep trainers who are, to be fair, trying to give parents something objective, measurable, and like something to follow. And I can really see the appeal, like the idea of knowing how to make your baby calm and relaxed and sleep well by following this prescriptive chart that tells you when your baby needs to nap at different ages. Boy, does that sound appealing. Problem is, they're largely bullshit because they don't account for the variation in sleep needs. They don't account for how much sleep pressure the child has, which is affected by your metabolic rate, by your genetics, by your activity level, by the amount of stimulation you've had, by the development that's going on in your brain, and all sorts. And so the reason I hate them is because they detract from encouraging a parent to observe their child, get to know their child, figure out what their child is telling them through their behavior, and being curious about what their child is telling them. So if they're crying and fussing, and the wake window chart is basically saying, oh, that's because they need a nap right now. That's what I'm talking about, that tired filter. Take the tired filter off, put the curiosity filter on, and just wonder, like, you're fussing. Okay, I'm just taking that at face value. what could that mean? Let me start by just having a guess. Like, maybe do you need to be put in a different position? Do you need a new toy? Do you need to be picked up? Do you need a feed? Do you need a bum change? Whatever. Like, there are 100 things that could be bugging them in that moment. And tiredness might be it. But I'm not saying it's never tiredness. But let's not immediately assume, based on a prescriptive, non-evidence based, non-personalized chart.
Arbitrary.
Yeah, just
Okay.
I get the appeal. I really understand it. And do you know
Yeah.
what? There'll be people listening who are like, this woman's talking shit because I used a weight window chart and it was amazing. It saved my sanity. It worked amazingly. Yeah, it probably will for a few people, but it's probably just because you got lucky and because you had a child who had fairly average sleep needs. It
Mm.
will happen from time to time that it will work out, but it's definitely not something that I would recommend as a general rule to everybody.
More and more, I'm feeling like there are parallels with all of this stuff and things like nutrition or wellness or health, right? So there isn't one way to move your body. There isn't one way to eat. There isn't one way to do X, Y, and Z. But it seems like there are some umbrella ideas or core values underneath
Yeah,
as foundational principles, which is like you should probably eat some vegetables, you should probably move your body, probably shouldn't smoke or drink, right? And
yeah.
the rest is kind of details. Is that fair of the parenting slash sleep space of like um
That sounds like a really healthy way to approach it.
okay. And then just so I'm clear, when you talk about responsive sleep, maybe this will be the last question because I know we're running out of time, but
It's
responsive
okay.
sleep as opposed to non-responsive sleep, uh, can you just highlight some of the bullet points of what that
The
means?
difference?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like we've
absolutely.
done
So
non-responsive pretty
it
well.
it includes yeah, I'll shut up about that now. Sorry, the internet went a bit glitchy for a minute then. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, what can you do that is responsive? For a start, you can really try to understand what your baby's telling you through their behavior. That's a really important one, and it's not quick. It takes 2 or 3 weeks to begin to understand what your baby's telling you. That's number one. Number two is be very, very mindful of your own emotional state. Number three would be look at your support network. So look at how you're functioning as a couple. So if you have a partner, how are you doing this as a team? Like, the clue is in the word partner. Like, how are you going to divide all of the jobs? How are you going to come together and figure out a way that makes sense and feels good for both of you to parent your little one? But also, more widely, looking at your other support networks. So when people offer to help or bring a meal round, like, say yes instantly and don't ever be shy about that. Look at what the community can do for you and look at what you can do for the community. How can you be that person for somebody else who's had a new baby as well? And then it's things like understanding variable sleep needs. So I spend a huge amount of time talking about things like sleep pressure, understanding when children need to sleep, and when you're trying to support a child who is actually tired to fall asleep, it's actually pretty easy because their body is screaming at them, I need sleep, really badly. And it instantly becomes less of a fight because you're both on the same page. You're like, I want to go to sleep. I want you to go to sleep. Okay, let's figure it out. But to do that, you also need to have that self-regulation, so that you can infect your baby with your calm, and your
Mm.
confidence. Babies can smell fear at 100 paces, I swear. So that's really important. And then thinking about the environment. So thinking about how children let off steam. How do they calm down? How How do they communicate their needs for play or interaction, or when do they need a break? When do they just need to just chill and be on their own? Really understanding all of that. I know it might sound like it's nothing, but actually that's really fundamental for supporting them with sleep. And then the rest is kind of like their environment, their sleep space, having gentle things like a bedtime routine, a sleep environment that's conducive to sleep. So it's dark, it's cool, it's quiet, all of that stuff. Managing the development of their circadian rhythm. I mean, there's some other things as well, like, making sure feeding's going well, making sure there aren't any underlying red flags or health problems or whatever. But really, if you can figure out behavioral cues and regulation, and you're tuning in to when their sleep pressure is high enough for them to go to sleep, it doesn't have to be a headache. It really doesn't.
And then what's going on with kids that are overtired? Because I've seen these firsthand with my siblings, and you're like, you are a walking zombie right now. Just lay down and shut your eyes, and we're all good. Uh,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what's happening?
Really interesting question. So, I I used to use the word overtired. In my first book, I did. I binned it very very soon after writing that book because I realised that it was misunderstood and overblown. And really, if you replace the word overtired with dysregulated, everything suddenly makes more sense. I promise. So when you see these kids who are like just they're just hanging, aren't they? They are absolutely bouncing off the walls, or they are screaming. They're lying on the floor. They're falling apart. They're obviously very, very tired. And so somebody who's concentrating and going, yeah, but Lyndsey, you said if their sleep pressure's high, they'll just go to sleep. They won't fight it. But only if they're also calm. That's the key piece of the puzzle here. If you are really, really tired, but you're also wound up and stressed, you're not going to sleep anytime soon. And you know that because, I don't know, if you're really tired, but you've got a big interview the next day, or you've had a massive fight with your partner, or I don't know, something stressful is going on in your life, you're worried about your health or your finances or your family or whatever, you're not going to sleep because actually your stress response is telling you it's not safe to fall asleep right now. That comes back to that primal instinctive behavior. Sleep is a feature of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest state. You might have heard, if you've gone to childbirth classes with your girlfriend, about how oxytocin, which is the hormone that causes the uterus to contract and start labor, is inhibited by stress, and that's why you want your birthing partner to be somewhere where they're relaxed and they're calm and they're not frightened and scared, because actually stress can inhibit labor, can't it? And there are a lot of parallels here, because if you're stressed, if you're bummed out, if you're anxious, or even if you're excited, your sympathetic nervous system is activated to some extent. And that means that your body is going, it's not really sleep time. We've got to just resolve this situation first. Because your body doesn't necessarily know whether that stress hormone, that cortisol, is caused by excitement or anxiety or panic or fear of death or whatever it is. It just knows that your stress response is elevated and therefore it's not safe right now. So back to the child who's falling apart and missed their nap and it's now 2 hours past bedtime. The thing to do is get them calm again, calm them down, and then the sleep pressure hasn't gone anywhere. They're still tired. It's just that the dysregulation is bigger than the fatigue in that moment. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And hearing you suggest to swap overtired for dysregulated and that will change everything. When you said that, my brain kind of like clicked. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's good. That's really good. I've not heard that described in such a succinct perspective shifting way. So thank you for that.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me just pick your brain for an hour. I really
It's fun.
appreciate that.
That's
Um,
cool.
and I'm sure others will as well. And so I know you've got a website, books, online programs, pamphlets. You're a public speaker. You have scientific publications,
All the things. Yeah.
Instagram. Yeah, I'll put links in the show notes. But is there anything specific that if someone's listening that's thinking, gosh, I love Dr. Lyndsey Hookway. How can I get more of her? Where do you send them?
Well, I mean, Instagram is a pretty good place to start. If you're like, I'm not sure if I want to trust her just yet, then Instagram is a pretty good place to get a snapshot of who I am and what I talk about and what I'm into. And then
Mm,
the website, I guess. So lyndseyhookway.com. Just be careful how you spell Lindsay because my parents gave me a name no one can spell. So you need to spell it right to get to the right website. But
yeah.
yeah, just follow the links in the show notes. Everyone will be good.
All right. So you can now understand why Dr. Lyndsey Hookway is seen as a warm and humorous and passionate speaker. She's also an advocate for gentle parenting practices all around the world. And as mentioned in the show notes, there are links to all of the things that she does and has done. Please click those, check those out. If you have any questions or suggestions for me, I am all ears. I am literally just made of ears. That's me. You can find me everywhere online at Long Distance Love Bombs, in particular on Instagram, where I share my words with the world. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. If you know somebody that has a new one on the way or that has recently created a little human and brought them into the world, pass this along. This is I think this is the third in a series of 6 podcasts that I'm doing around parenting, sleep, breastfeeding, etc. So I'm trying to create a little 6 podcast package for parents to dive into and get across the science and also the experiences of those who have lived and taught all of this stuff for decades. Thank you for being here. Thank you for you, and I will talk to you soon.